Welcome to Story Time. Was it divine intervention or a carefully orchestrated cover-up? Could the miracle have had more to do with human hands than heavenly ones? But before we begin, get comfortable, really comfortable. Fluff your pillows, pull that blanket tight and settle in. Trust me, you'll want to be cozy for this. Your eyes flicker open to darkness, just the faintest glow of dawn peeking in. Divine favor, or royal favoritism? The scandal behind Daniel's survival. Was it divine intervention or a carefully orchestrated cover-up? When Daniel walked out of the lion's den without a scratch, it shocked an empire. But as we peel back the layers of this ancient tale, another story begins to take shape, one of political power, royal guilt, and a possible setup that challenges everything we thought we knew. Could the miracle have had more to do with human hands than heavenly ones? Daniel's story takes place under the rule of King Darius in the Persian Empire, a time when politics were deadly and loyalty was currency. As an exile from Judah, Daniel had risen to a high position of power, a fact that made him both respected and resented. When jealous officials tricked Darius into signing a decree that would guarantee Daniel's death, the stage was set for what many believed to be a divine rescue. But others might see it as the ultimate example of political theatre, the law or the loophole. The law was clear. For 30 days, no one could pray to anyone but King Darius. Violators would be thrown into the lion's den. Daniel broke that law knowingly. And yet, despite the law's severity, Darius spent the entire night trying to save him. Was this the behavior of a ruler respecting divine law, or a man trying to undo a mistake without losing face? Some scholars speculate that Darius never intended for the lions to kill Daniel. Could the den have been prepared differently? Were the lions fed beforehand? Was there a secret passage or chamber? The text doesn't say, but the absence of detail invites questions. Faith or favoritism? Darius publicly declared that Daniel's God must be real after the incident, but his reaction could just as easily be seen as a political maneuver. Declaring allegiance to Daniel's God may have been a way to calm public unrest or strengthen alliances with Judean captives. In ancient empires, religious acts often doubled as public relations. After Daniel's miraculous escape, the king ordered the accusers and their families to be thrown into the same den where they were immediately killed. This detail is disturbing. Why punish the families? Why not simply remove the corrupt officials? This brutal response may have been less about justice and more about restoring royal authority and silencing dissent. Unanswered questions. Was Daniel's survival a miracle or a message? Why was Darius so emotionally invested in one man's fate? If Daniel was truly innocent, why did the story end with bloodshed? The story of Daniel in the lion's den is more than a children's tale about faith and courage. It's a political thriller laced with mystery and motive. Whether you believe in divine intervention or courtly manipulation, one thing is certain: someone wanted Daniel to survive and someone else paid the price. In the end, we're left wondering not just how he survived, but why. Now the rest of the story. Daniel and the Lion's Den. A story of resistance and faith. Daniel's experience in the lion's den is one of the Bible's most enduring portraits of steadfast faith in the face of imperial power. His story unfolds in the turbulent years after Judah's fall to Babylon, a time when many Israelites were torn from their homeland and made to serve foreign kings. Despite exile and cultural pressure, Daniel distinguished himself through exceptional wisdom, integrity, and unwavering devotion to the God of Israel. After Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians, King Darius reorganized the vast kingdom. Daniel was appointed as one of 3 administrators overseeing 120 satraps, regional governors charged with collecting tribute and maintaining order. Among them, Daniel stood out so far in ability and trustworthiness that Darius planned to set him over the entire empire. This provoked jealousy and resentment among the other officials who plotted to remove him. Knowing that Daniel was faithful in all his duties, they searched for any flaw in his record, but found none. They realized the only way to undermine him would be to use his loyalty to God against him. In a cunning move, They persuaded King Darius to sign an irrevocable decree. For 30 days, no one could pray to any god or person except the king himself. Anyone who disobeyed would be cast into a den of lions, a punishment designed to be both terrifying and final. When Daniel learned of the edict, he did not compromise or hide. 3 times a day, he went to his upstairs room, opened the windows facing Jerusalem, and prayed, giving thanks to God just as he had always done. To Daniel, his relationship with God transcended any royal decree. His faith was not something to be performed in secret when it was convenient. It was the unshakable center of his life. Predictably, his enemies seized their moment. They burst in, catching Daniel in prayer, and hurried to inform the king. Darius was devastated. He valued Daniel and immediately understood he had been manipulated into condemning an innocent man. Though he spent the rest of the day trying to find a loophole, the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be changed. At sunset, the king reluctantly ordered Daniel to be brought to the lion's den. As Daniel was lowered inside, Darius called out words filled with both sorrow and hope. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was rolled across the entrance and sealed with the king's signet ring and those of the nobles, ensuring no one could tamper with the sentence. That night, Darius returned to his palace in anguish. He refused all entertainment, could not eat, and did not sleep. The first light of dawn found him hurrying back to the den. His voice trembled as he called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" From the darkness came Daniel's calm reply. God had sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths. They had not harmed him because he was found blameless before God and before the king. Overjoyed, Darius commanded that Daniel be lifted out. Not a scratch was found on him. In a reversal of fortune, those who had plotted against Daniel were themselves thrown into the den along with their families. Before they reached the floor, the lions overpowered them, a grim reminder of what Daniel had been spared. This remarkable deliverance was more than personal vindication. King Darius issued a proclamation to all peoples and nations, declaring that Daniel's God is the living God whose kingdom would never be destroyed and whose power endures forever. A private act of devotion became an international testimony to God's sovereignty. The story of Daniel and the lion's den offers timeless lessons. It is about the tension between loyalty to God and pressure from earthly authorities. Daniel's quiet but unyielding faith demonstrates that true devotion is not conditional. He did not know whether God would save him. He prayed because it was right, not because it guaranteed a miracle. It is also a story of God's intimate care in the most desperate circumstances. In a place meant to destroy him, Daniel found safety. The lions, symbols of violent judgment, became silent witnesses to God's protection. Even in exile, even under foreign rule, God remained faithful. For the exiled Israelites, Daniel's courage was a reminder that God was still present, even in Babylon. For people of faith today, it challenges us to consider whether our own convictions would remain intact under threat or pressure. Would we trust God even when no deliverance seems certain? In the quiet hours before dawn, when fear prowls like a lion and uncertainty seems to swallow hope, Daniel's story calls us to a higher allegiance. It whispers that faith can be a steady flame in the darkness, and that no empire, no decree, no den of lions can extinguish the light of God's presence. A Babylonian tale of ambition, conquest, and a city built to touch the heavens. Nebuchadnezzar II, builder, warrior, king. The heat of the Mesopotamian sun shimmered over the walls of Babylon, their bricks glowing gold in the afternoon light. Somewhere inside the palace, a man sat draped in fine linen, his eyes fixed on the city that bore his mark. His name was Nebuchadnezzar II, king, conqueror, visionary. To the outside world, he was the man who had turned Babylon into the jewel of the ancient world. To those who knew him, he was a ruler obsessed with immortality, not just for himself, but for the empire he commanded. Nebuchadnezzar had not been born into a weak throne. His father, Nabopolassar, had already freed Babylon from Assyrian domination. But when Nebuchadnezzar ascended the throne in 605 BCE, he saw something greater, an empire that could rival the gods themselves. His reign would be marked by war and wonder in equal measure. The warrior king long before the perfumed gardens and marble halls, Nebuchadnezzar was a commander with dust in his beard and blood on his sword. His defining moment came at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BCE, where his forces clashed with Egypt and the remnants of the Assyrian army. The victory was decisive, not just militarily but symbolically. In a single campaign, he had ended centuries of Assyrian dominance and cemented Babylon's place as the new superpower. But war is never clean. Victories brought spoils, captives, and unrest. Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Judah in 597 BCE resulted in the Babylonian exile. Thousands of Jews marched from Jerusalem to Babylon, their temple in ruins. This act would become one of the most pivotal wounds in Jewish history, reshaping their religion and identity for generations. For Nebuchadnezzar, it was simply strategy. Remove rebellion at the root. For the exiled, it was the defining trauma of an age. Nebuchadnezzar's reputation was complex. His enemies feared his relentless campaigns, yet his own generals respected his tactical genius. He was a ruler who didn't just command from afar, he stood in the dust of battle, personally ensuring the victories that fed his empire's expansion. The builder. When Nebuchadnezzar looked at Babylon, he didn't just see a city, he saw an unfinished masterpiece. The throne room became his drafting table, the empire's treasury, his ink. His orders were clear. Babylon must not only function as a capital, it must dazzle like the dwelling place of gods. Under his direction, the Ishtar Gate rose, a massive entryway faced with deep blue glazed bricks and adorned with striding lions, bulls, and dragons. These were not mere decorations, they were symbols of divine protection and imperial authority. The processional way, paved with limestone, led visitors from the gate deep into the city's ceremonial heart, leaving them awestruck. He also ordered the reconstruction of temples, the most ambitious being Etemenanki, the great ziggurat some believe inspired the biblical Tower of Babel. Here, priests climbed terraces toward the sky, performing rituals meant to bridge the human and divine realms. Then there were the Hanging Gardens, a creation shrouded in mystery. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built them for his Median queen, Amytis, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. Terraces rose like a verdant mountain from the city's stone, sustained by an ingenious irrigation system. Whether myth or history, the story cemented his legacy as not only a builder of walls, but a cultivator of beauty. The shadow of power. For all his achievements, Nebuchadnezzar's reign was not free from controversy. Biblical texts portray him as a man whose pride bordered on blasphemy. In the book of Daniel, he is confronted with a dream, a colossal statue with a head of gold, shattered by a mysterious stone. The interpretation? His empire would fall, replaced by others, in a divine sequence of history. Then comes the more haunting account, a king driven mad, living like a wild beast, eating grass until he acknowledged the sovereignty of the God of Israel. Whether this was an allegory, a political smear, or a real psychological break, it remains a chilling reminder that even the most powerful rulers are vulnerable to forces beyond their control. To his subjects, Nebuchadnezzar was godlike. To his critics, he was dangerously human. Military campaigns and conquests. When Nebuchadnezzar II took the throne in 605 BCE, he didn't inherit peace. He inherited a map covered in enemies. The Assyrian Empire had crumbled, leaving a vacuum every power-hungry state wanted to fill. Egypt, under Pharaoh Necho II, was making a bold push north, aiming to reclaim territories along the Levant coast. This was the world Nebuchadnezzar stepped into, not with hesitation, but with a commander's hunger. His first defining act came at the Battle of Carchemish. The field was a cauldron of clashing armies, the Euphrates at their backs and the ruins of Assyria at their feet. By the end of the battle, Egyptian ambitions in the north were crushed. and Babylon stood as the undisputed heir to the region. But victory was only the beginning. Nebuchadnezzar moved like a storm. Phoenicia, Syria, and Judah fell under Babylon's shadow in quick succession. Each conquest was a statement. Babylon was not merely a successor to Assyria, it was a superior force. Jerusalem, however, would prove both a prize and a thorn. Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city not once but twice. In 597 BCE, he exiled King Jehoiakim and the city's elite, installing a puppet ruler. But rebellion sparked again, and in 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar razed the city and destroyed Solomon's temple. This act, seen by the Babylonians as a strategic necessity, was recorded by the Jews as a catastrophic tragedy seared into scripture and memory. The brilliance of Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns lay in their speed and their message. He didn't just conquer land, he dismantled resistance at its source, relocating rebellious populations and ensuring loyalty through fear, tribute, and strategic marriages. To some, he was a liberator of trade routes and culture. To others, a destroyer of worlds. Cultural and religious legacy. Nebuchadnezzar's power didn't end at the tip of his spear. It extended into the spiritual and cultural fabric of his empire. In Babylon, religion wasn't merely a matter of faith, it was politics, legitimacy, and cosmic order woven into one. Nebuchadnezzar knew this, and he wielded it like another weapon. At the heart of Babylon's theology was Marduk, the city's patron god. Nebuchadnezzar positioned himself as Marduk's chosen king, restorer of the temples and defender of the divine order. Each victory in battle was credited not only to military strategy, but to Marduk's favor. This divine endorsement wasn't subtle, it was etched in cuneiform on bricks carved into steles and displayed in public processions. To resist Nebuchadnezzar was to resist the god who gave him the throne. His reign also became a cultural renaissance. The city's walls, gates, and ziggurats were more than architectural marvels, they were religious propaganda in stone and brick. The Ishtar Gate gleamed in lapis blue, its lions symbolizing the goddess's power and Babylon's invincibility. Temples to other deities flourished, signaling a kind of religious inclusivity that made conquered peoples feel folded into the empire's divine tapestry, though always under Babylonian supremacy. This blending of faith and politics outlasted Nebuchadnezzar's lifetime. Even in exile, the Jewish people engaged with Babylonian cosmology, astronomical knowledge, and myth. Some of these influences filtered into later Jewish writings, not as acts of assimilation, but as dialogues between conquered and conqueror. In the end, Nebuchadnezzar's cultural and religious legacy was as potent as his military one. His empire may have fallen to Persia within a century, but his image, half warrior, half servant of the gods, has lingered for over 2 millennia, leaving future empires to ask, can power ever truly be separated from the divine? Legacy. When Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BCE, Babylon was the crown jewel of the ancient world. His construction projects, military dominance, and administrative control had shaped an empire that seemed unshakable. Yet history has no favorites. Less than a century later, Cyrus the Great of Persia would walk through Babylon's gates, ending its independence without a single major battle. Nebuchadnezzar's works, however, outlived his empire. Archaeologists still unearth his inscriptions. His image persists in religious texts, art, and literature. His name is synonymous with grandeur, ambition, and the delicate balance between human achievement and divine will. The Book of Revelation, a symbol of spiritual corruption in Babylon. It's late. The world outside your window is quiet, but your mind is restless. You flip open a worn Bible and land in the final book, Revelation. The words read like a dream, half remembered, or a nightmare you wish you could forget. And there, looming like a shadow across the pages, is a name you've heard before. Babylon. But this isn't the Babylon of brick walls, hanging gardens, or river trade. This Babylon is something else entirely. She's dressed in purple and scarlet, dripping with gold, precious stones and pearls. In one jeweled hand, she holds a golden cup, but it's not filled with wine. John the Revelator says it's full of abominations, the spiritual poison she serves to nations and kings alike. And the kings drink. The merchants prosper. The people look on in awe, Babylon as a code for Rome. By the time Revelation was written, Babylon the city had been dust for centuries, its walls breached by Cyrus the Great, its empire long gone. So why was John writing as if Babylon still lived? Because it did, just not in the way most people think. Babylon became a code word for the Roman Empire. The first Christians lived under Rome's shadow, an empire of unmatched wealth, military power, and brutality. Directly condemning Rome could have been fatal. By calling it Babylon, John could warn believers about the dangers of imperial seduction and oppression without naming names. This code would have been instantly understood by those who knew their scriptures. The ancient Babylon had destroyed Jerusalem's temple, carried the Jewish people into exile, and demanded loyalty to pagan gods. Rome had done the same, destroying the Second Temple in 70 CE, crushing Jewish revolts, and persecuting Christians who refused to bow to the emperor. To John's audience, Babylon was both past and present, an empire reborn in different clothes. The purple and scarlet robes were now Roman togas, the golden cup now filled by the wealth of conquered nations. Babylon's legacy in Christian thought. Over the centuries, Babylon became more than a historical memory or a code for Rome. It became a theological symbol. Early Christian writers like Augustine saw Babylon as the city of man, a representation of all human pride, greed, and rebellion against God. In contrast, the city of God was the eternal, heavenly kingdom. Later reformers like Martin Luther applied the image of Babylon to the institutions they opposed, most famously calling the Catholic Church of his day the whore of Babylon in his fiery critiques. For centuries, Christians have used Babylon as a metaphor for corrupt systems, oppressive governments, or moral decay, whether in politics, religion, or culture. This flexibility is part of Babylon's power as a symbol. It's never tied to just one place or one time. Babylon can be ancient or modern, an empire of soldiers or an empire of ideas. It is whatever stands in opposition to God's justice and truth. Centuries before John wrote these visions, Babylon had already fallen, its walls breached by Cyrus the Great, its people absorbed into the Persian Empire. But in Revelation, the city rises again, not in stone, but in symbol. For early Christians living under the weight of the Roman Empire, Babylon became a code word. It was the embodiment of any power, past, present, or future, that seduced the world with wealth, crushed the innocent, and demanded allegiance above God. The image is unsettling because it's familiar. Babylon in Revelation isn't just ancient history, it's every corrupt system you've ever seen, every empire that hides its violence behind beauty, every leader who smiles as they sell their soul. John doesn't describe Babylon as a fortress or battlefield, but as a woman, a great prostitute, riding a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. It's grotesque and mesmerizing all at once. She's not forcing nations to bow, they come willingly. Her influence isn't built on fear alone, but desire. The more they take from her, the more they want. And yet John says her fall will come in a single hour. The merchants who once traded in gold, silver, and spices will weep, not because they loved her, but because their profits are gone. The kings who once drank from her cup will stand at a distance, watching the smoke rise from her ruin. The message is clear, but it's not comfortable. Revelation's Babylon is a warning disguised as a vision. Power that looks unstoppable can collapse in a moment. The glitter that draws you in can also be the chain that holds you. For the first Christians, this symbol was both a prophecy and a survival tool. By naming Rome as Babylon without saying it outright, they could speak truth in a world where truth-tellers were killed. For readers today, Babylon lingers as a mirror, asking us which empires we're willing to serve and which ones we'll have the courage to walk away from. What makes the image of Babylon so unsettling is that it feels alive. Empires rise and fall, but the spirit of Babylon, the drive to dominate, seduce, and corrupt, always seems to find a new host. Whether it's in the marble halls of Rome, the skyscrapers of modern cities, or the digital empires of today, Babylon whispers the same promises of power and pleasure. For the first Christians, Babylon was a survival warning. For us, it's a mirror. We have to ask, are we standing outside the city walls, or are we drinking from her cup? Somewhere in the middle of the night, you close the book. The world outside is still quiet, but the question lingers. If Babylon rose again tomorrow, would we even recognize her? As the shadows lengthen and the stars begin to whisper, we close the pages of this ancient tale. In the hush of night, truth rests where faith once stood strong. Sleep gently now, wrapped in the echoes of empires long gone. Until next time, when darkness falls and another lullaby of a fallen world begins.